Nicknames are common throughout all sports and life, even, but I think they permeate baseball on a level deeper than any other. Sure, football had the fridge, basketball had the black mamba, women's figure skating had kneecaps. But what other sport could have a guy with an actual name as insane as Johnny Dick Shot and still come up with a nickname that had nothing to do with that? Only baseball. So I was having trouble figuring out a method by which to determine the best nickname in baseball, and after considering precisely one other option, I decided to go with the obvious answer: March Madness bracket. So 64 nicknames arranged by region. We have good at baseball, reverent or occasionally irreverent, old, and probably not so good at baseball. And these are just generalizations about most of them in the region. Not everyone fits exactly. Anyway, starting with probably good, we have the good at pitching group, consisting of the big unit, Randy Johnson, perhaps best well known for his work with birds, the big train, Walter Johnson, so named because a train was the fastest thing anyone had ever seen in the 1910s, the rocket, Roger Clemens, named in a similar fashion but in the 1980s, and rounding out the group is Francisco Rodriguez, better known as K-Rod, and I think when the scoring abbreviation for a strikeout is in your nickname, you're probably not bad, at least if you're a pitcher. Now, the criteria for picking the best name of each group is going to be suspect at best, I think. My personal biases will be on full display from the start here because the winner here is going to be the big train. I'm not autistic, but I really do love trains, and I also think that having the first nickname that was basically just the fastest thing someone could think of is pretty cool. Our next group will be the counterpart to the first group, good at hitting. Keeping with the theme so far of big nicknames, we have the Big Hurt, Frank Thomas, Hammer and Hank Aaron, the Capital Punisher, Frank Howard, known for his power hitting years for the Washington Senators, and those are the Washington Senators that became the Texas Rangers, not the Washington Senators that became the Minnesota Twins. And last but not least, we have the all-important play-in spot, which will be used for all of Babe Ruth's various nicknames.
You never heard of the Salted of SWAT? The Colossus of Clout?
The King of Crash, man.
Oh, yeah, the Great Bambino.
And while the Colossus of Clout is sort of a banger that was way before its time, there's no beating the classic, The Great Bambino, at least in terms of Ruth's own nicknames. I really do like all of the nicknames in this category. They're really great in their own regards. Anytime that you are referencing death in a baseball nickname, I think it's fantastic. But only one of these can win, and only one of these had an effect on one of the biggest rappers of the 80s. See, Oakland used to have a Major League Baseball team. And Reggie Jackson said this bat boy Stanley Burrell they had looked a lot like Hank Aaron and started calling him Hammer, with the MC being added later as his rap career started. So for that little extra effect, I think Hank Aaron has to take it. There's also a lot of players throughout history that have had nicknames related to the team they played for, generally for their whole careers, and oddly enough, all of these seem to occur before the advent of free agency. These are relatively self-explanatory, I think, so we'll run through them pretty quickly. Mr. Padre, Tony Gwynn, did not actually occur before free agency, but Mr. Cub, Ernie Banks, Mr. Tiger, Al Kaline, and last but not least, Mr. Met. Last but not least, Joe DiMaggio. And while Paul Simon uses a different nickname for him a little later in this song, he was also known as the Yankee Clipper, referencing a plane used by Pan American Airlines. And I think Joe takes it for that reason. And to round out the being good at the sport category, I've just picked 4 guys that are top 20 all-time in war that I couldn't fit into any other category. Here we have the Man of Steel, Ricky Henderson, obvious reasons. The Say Hey Kid, Willie Mays, for how he greeted people apparently. The Iron Horse, Lou Gehrig, who was also allegedly nicknamed Biscuit Pants. And a man who I knew served in World War II, but was unaware until now he returned to active service for the Korean War as well, Ted Williams. Williams had many nicknames, but I'm going with Teddy Ballgame for this one. Splendid Splinter is good, but I think the name that references baseball itself as a concept is probably the better one. But I think the overall group winner here has to be Man of Steel. It's way too good of a pun to be beaten. So that leaves us with Big Train against Hammer and Hank, and the Yankee Clipper against the Man of Steel. Frankly, a hitter and pitcher matchup I'd love to see, and a foot race I'd love to see. I think to find the champion of the good at ball region, Hammer and Hank beats the Big Train, Ricky beats DiMaggio, and then Ricky beats Hank Aaron.
I'm the greatest of all time.
And now on to the next region, reverent, or in one case, irreverent nicknames. Group 1 is what I call the Church of Baseball.
I believe in the Church of Baseball.
Here we have Dom Paul, known as the Pope, given how his name sounded similar to the Pope at the time, John Paul II. There are a number of players that were nicknamed either Preacher or Deacon, it turns out. but there was only one guy that Baseball Reference says went by both, Vern Law, so he'll just be the representative for both of them. And this was because Law was actually a deacon and ordained as a priest in the Church of Latter-day Saints all before he was 18 years old. And last we have Billy Sunday, known as the Evangelist, but it's unclear if he was called that when he played, because afterwards he went on to be one of the most influential evangelist preachers in the United States in the early 20th century. An interesting story, but we have a Pope from Chicago now, and there's a guy who played for the White Sox that was called the Pope, so I think he sort of wins by default. Staying fairly closely related to the first group, we have the mythological group. Obviously, Thor is there, Noah Syndergaard, and the Greek god of walks, Kevin Youkilis, and then some odd ones. Third in this group is Red Lucas, who was called the Nashville Narcissus by apparently one newspaper reporter referencing the bright future he had ahead of him, which is not what I think of when I think of Narcissus. I think of the guy who fell in love with his own reflection. And last but not least in this group, one of the most interesting players maybe in this whole video, Tony Mullane, who was called the Apollo of the Box. Now, the nickname isn't terribly interesting, but it took me a minute to figure out where it came from. In the early days of baseball, the pitcher also stood in the box like the batter does, and Apollo was the Greek god of many things, but none are why they called Mullane that. Apollo was also known to be the most handsome or beautiful of all of the gods on Mount Olympus, and Mullane was apparently so good-looking that the teams he played for would schedule Ladies' Day on the days Mullane was going to pitch to try to drive attendance. On top of all this, he also pitched with both hands, and he was the first pitcher to ever do so. So honestly, even though it's cool that they maybe called Kevin Youkilis the Greek god of walks, and Noah Syndergaard is the starting point of one of the most iconic moments in baseball history, in my opinion.
That makes it worse! Terry, that makes it fucking worse!
I think Apollo of the Box has to be the winner. A lot of baseball nicknames are just where a player is from, and many times this is just the state that a player hails from, so this category is for them. Starting with the Georgia Peach, Ty Cobb. We then have the Arkansas Hummingbird, Lon Warneke, Louisiana Lightning, Ron Guidry, and of course, the Flying Hawaiian, Shane Victorino, who takes the title because it rolls off the tongue just so well. And finishing out the left side of the bracket here, we have miscellaneous. I couldn't really fit these guys in anywhere else, but they're too good or too ridiculous not to include. We have Bill Spaceman Lee, so named because, well, just go watch his cameo in the movie Ephus. Pat the Bat, Pat Burrell, main character of many of the greatest off-field stories in Major League Baseball history. Crime Dog, Fred McGriff, and probably the least reverent name in the region. There was an Italian player for the Yankees called Tony Lazzeri. Yeah, Tony Lazzeri was Italian. And because of this, they called him Push 'em Up Tony in reference to Benito Mussolini and something that he said.
Push 'em up! Push 'em up!
I thought that was too ridiculous to not include. I think this category has to go to Crime Dog for being way too cool and a fun play on McGruff, the Crime Dog. So that gives us the Pope and Apollo of the Box and the Flying Hawaiian versus the Crime Dog. And I think Apollo wins, Crime Dog wins, and then Crime Dog wins again.
I'm McGruff, the Crime Dog.
Now to the region with the most colorful names, in my opinion, but the one that's also the worst to edit. Old. Not a lot of video for most of these groups. Old nicknames had qualities that you really don't see so much in modern nicknames, and the first group is nicknames that could also be a famous criminal. Starting with the Palatine Pounder, who sounds like a guy who should be sharing a cell with Reese McGuire if he was a normal guy caught doing what he did, but is actually Mike Tauchman, who hails from Palatine, Illinois, and is the most obviously not old guy included in this region. Next is Tommy Corcoran, known as Tommy the Cork, who could very well be a minor character in the last couple seasons of Peaky Blinders I didn't really watch. Dick Stewart had about a dozen nicknames about how he couldn't field to save his life, but none sound more like a murderer than the Boston Strangler. And rounding out the gang, we have Jack Clark, who was known as Jack the Ripper, both for how he hit the ball and for how often he fought with his managers. Feels like cheating since that's the name of an actual famous murderer, but whatever. Anyway, I think the Boston Strangler is the winner because I like thinking about how it would have played out if the Scranton Strangler subplot from The Office had been done in my favorite sitcom, Cheers, where obviously the subtle clues would have pointed to Cliff Clavin being the Strangler.
Hello in there, Cliff. Tell me, what color is the sky in your world?
I think this is my favorite subcategory. Guys who played before the number of balls in a walk was reduced to its current number of 4. You can't have a nickname compilation without Old Hoss, Charles Radbourn, the first man to ever flip the bird in a photograph. I personally can't talk about old players without talking about Arlie Latham, called the freshest man on earth, who is also the reason that base coach boxes exist. George Zetline served in both the Union Army and Navy during the American Civil War.
Oh, way down south in the land of traitors.
And after that, played for the Chicago White Stockings and some other teams with really incredible names, like the Troy Haymakers and the Brooklyn Eckfords. He was called, for reasons I cannot find even a clue to, the Lively Turtle. And last in this group of old guys, Pierce Childs, who was known as What's the Use? Because apparently that's what he would say to opposing players as he caught pop-ups that they hit, which seems like about the best trash talk you could come up with in 1899. But the winner of this group was always going to be Old Hoss. The next group is sort of unique in the sense that the nicknames in it are not. They're all nicknames that 50 or more guys have had throughout the history of baseball, at least according to this Saber article. So any player with this nickname that you want can be the example here. Lefty, given for obvious reasons, has the most with 153, and some great players as examples, like Lefty Grove. Red is second with 120, and includes Red Faber, one of the 17 pitchers who were allowed to keep throwing the spitball after it was made illegal for the 1920 season. Doc comes in third with 61, although many of these also fall into the category of being unclear whether they were called this when they were playing, as many of the docs in question gained these nicknames by becoming some kind of doctor after their playing days. And sneaking just above the line with 52, rounding out the group, is Bud, or Buddy. This is a hard choice since definitionally these cannot be unique, but I do think that Doc is probably my favorite of the bunch. Sound off with your favorite lefties and reds and Docs and Buds in the comments, but you can't take Bud Dwyer. He's my favorite.
He wants to kill himself right now.
And rounding out the old region is Too Long, which is fairly self-explanatory. Starting with Hall of Famer Luke Appling, he was called Old Aches and Pains for his many minor ailments he complained about throughout his career. Pepper Martin was called the Wild Horse of the Osage for the way he ran and where he was from in Oklahoma. Perhaps the most perplexing nickname in this entire deal, Charlie Paber was called the Old Woman in the Red Cap, which apparently might have been a reference to A Tale of Two Cities, but I have no idea. Rounding it out, one of the true greats, Sandy Koufax, who had the incredible nickname the Left Arm of God. And since it's even more incredible that he deserved that nickname, I think that makes him the winner of this one. So in the old region, that gives us the Boston Strangler and Old Hoss, Doc and the Left Arm of God. Old Hoss moves on, Sandy moves on, and we have a hell of a pitcher's duel here, but while Old Hoss rolls off the tongue better, I do think the Left Arm of God takes the win. And now to our final region, which, sort of tongue-in-cheek, I've named Probably Bad as a counterpart to the first region. This is not to say that anyone in this group was bad at baseball, but ending up with a nickname like this probably means that people weren't necessarily considering their playing ability first. Our first group in this region is physical abnormalities, which are pretty self-explanatory. Starting with the exception to the group rule, because we always have one, Mordecai Three Finger Brown, who lost his index finger on his throwing hand in a farm machinery accident as a child, which apparently did not stop him from throwing one of the best curveballs in the early history of the game. Sticking with hands, we have Antonio Alfonseca, called El Pulpo, the octopus for us gringos, because he had 6 fingers on each hand. The last 2 spots in this group are taken by Don Mossi and Ernie Lombardi, who are known as Ears and Schnoz, respectively, because, well, but I think is the only member of this group that the source of their nickname gave them an unexpected advantage. Mordecai Brown wins. Next is nicknames that reference another player. Starting again with the exception to the rule, Lewis Wilson, better known as the single-season RBI champion, Hack Wilson. There's a number of stories about where the nickname came from, but one is that Wilson reminded Cubs fans of a previous left fielder also nicknamed Hack, Hack Miller, who was the son of a strongman and said to resemble George Hackenschmidt, a strongman who was credited with the invention of the bench press and the hack squat. Next we have Tyler Clippard, who when he pitched for the Yankees was dubbed the Yankee Clippard in reference to Joe DiMaggio's nickname. Keeping with the Yankees, Samuel Byrd was known as Babe Ruth's legs, as he was often a substitute for Ruth at the end of games as a pinch runner or a defensive replacement. After baseball, he went on to be a professional golfer, which is every baseball player's dream. Last in this group, we have Kyle Seager, who donned the self-deprecating name Corey's brother on his back for Players Weekend back in 2017. But the winner here is gonna be Babe Ruth's legs. Next is off-season jobs. Minor league salaries suck, Major League Baseball didn't always pay as well as it does now, so players often had gigs in the winter to make ends meet. Michael Fulmer worked as a plumber's apprentice for his first few off-seasons. Tom Wilhelmsen was a bartender during his 5-year hiatus from professional baseball. Richie Hebner worked in the cemeteries his father owned from a young age through his professional career and was called the Grave Digger. And this last one is sort of cheating since he just kind of liked doing it. It wasn't a job. But Tug McGraw was called the Barber because he just loved cutting people's hair. Also, full disclosure here, while I was trying to find a picture of Tug McGraw cutting someone's hair, I learned for the first time that Tug McGraw is Tim McGraw's dad. Not sure how that one eluded my cultural knowledge, but that's why I like making these. I learned so many useless little bits of information. But the winner here was obviously going to be the Grave Digger. Our final group of all, I've saved the best for last, insults. These are just things you would say to a guy you hate. Johnny Dickshot, which is an unbelievable name on its own, was nicknamed Ugly. Gabby Hartnett was called Old Tomato Face because apparently his face was nearly permanently flushed and ruddy. Just about every deaf player before a certain point was called Dummy, like Dummy Hoy. And last but certainly not least, we have Rube Waddell, who could famously be distracted by shiny objects or puppies in the crowd, and was once found wrestling alligators in the circus after going missing from his team. These are all pretty mean, but the stories about Rube Waddell are really funny, too funny to be believed sometimes, so I think Rube has to be the one to advance. So that gives us Three Finger, Babe Ruth's Legs, Gravedigger, and Rube. And I take Babe Ruth's Legs and Gravedigger, and then I think I take Gravedigger again for the win. So that gives us our final four: Man of Steel, Crime Dog, The Left Arm of God, and Gravedigger. You may have your own opinions on how we got here or where we go from here, but I think from here we take Crime Dog over Man of Steel, sorry Ricky, and Gravedigger over The Left Arm of God. And the ultimate baseball nickname is, and maybe was always going to be, Crime Dog. It's concise, it's a good reference. It was maybe an announcer misremembering the actual name of McGruff, and altogether I think it's the best nickname in baseball history. Let me know which great nicknames I missed, let me know where you disagree with me, or tell me that this was literally perfect in every way. And I'll see you next time.